All right. Hello and welcome into the second episode of the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM. This is big. This is big. I am Blake Wallis, your host, joined by my co-host and great friend, Jake Aron. Today's show is centered around the NFL Divisional Round. Additionally, we dive into this year's coaching carousel that is sure to be heating up in the next few weeks. I've identified 8 teams that will really need a head coach, and I've found their ideal match, and more on that in just a little bit. What does this show talk about usually? That is a very great question. NFL is mostly what we're talking about right now. We also like to talk about a lot of NBA and UFC topics. That's a lot of fun for us. Last week, we talked about the UFC 297 coming up. And one of the segments that I talked about, just going to create a little intro here, is Neil Magny, of course, former military, shout out there, getting it done against Mike Malott, which I had those feelings going in. Of course, Mike Malott was getting all the success off early rounds, and then with a miraculous finish, Neil Magny able to come away with the victory in the final seconds. Special guy, never give up. You like that kind of mentality. That works in both the military and the UFC. So it's good to see that on display. Sometimes we talk about Mizzou athletics, but it's really going to be a mostly professional sports show. How can we be found? Right now, the Blake and Jake Show is on Spotify and YouTube. But if you would like to just keep up with all the news and action going around the Blake and Jake Show and around KCOU in general, I encourage you to look at our Instagram. Once again, just the Blake and Jake Show. Go ahead and give us a follow, give us a like, and let us know that you are listening in. That's just exciting for the both of us.
Yes, real quick, the Blake and Jake Show, that is with no spaces, just straight through the Blake and Jake Show.
And with that, Jake, go ahead and take us into our very first segment of today's show.
Of course. So with the divisional round having come and gone, being last weekend, we have some takeaways from another exciting weekend for playoff football. So Blake, why don't you give me your divisional round takeaways?
Yeah, my divisional round takeaways. 4 games. I loved having NFL football on Saturday and Sunday. Sadly, that has come to pass this year, but it was short-lived, but it was very enjoyable. And we'll start off with the very first game of the weekends, the Ravens beating the Texans pretty soundly. And now, one of the things I keep saying all around this week is just, now that the Texans have lost, the Ravens are 1-4 chance to have the only season better than the Texans, because the season for the Texans has been spectacular, coming in as possibly the worst team in the league. In fact, I would say consensus preseason worst team in the league, and shocking so many throughout the year. And then still, even till the end, putting up a decent fight there, winning their wild card weekend, and then just running up against a juggernaut Ravens team. That Ravens team is special, but just to talk a little bit about the Texans more, maybe because I favorite them, is, just what they need to do into this offseason. It was a spectacular season, and really they need to retain what they have right now. We're going to get into the offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowick, later, and his whereabouts for the rest of the season. But it's just so important with the success that they found on offense and defense to just try to retain this year. They have not been successful for a long enough period of time yet to, I think, maybe start mixing some of those pieces in and out. It's so important. And then, of course, building that offensive line and protecting C.J. Stroud, your young star there, has to be the 2 main goals for this team this season. What do you think about that, Jake?
Yeah, I agree with that. C.J. Stroud, breakout season his rookie year. I totally agree. You got to protect him at all costs.
Yeah, and then talking about the Ravens, of course, Ravens have been spectacular. And looking at the matchups they have left, have to feel really good about playing the Chiefs. I feel like the Ravens felt like out of the 2 teams they could possibly be facing in the conference championship round, that the Bills might offer a little bit more of a dynamic threat, which I think might be the way that the Ravens fear losing so far. I feel like the Chiefs are a little bit of a better matchup for the Ravens. And then, of course, a lot of people are expecting the 49ers, who we're going to talk about in just a little bit, to really be the representatives of the NFC. And I have to think that the Ravens feel really good beating them soundly in the regular season, but really just having a stylistic matchup, just that run-heavy, great defense. The offense it's the extra, it's the icing on top. But the defense and the run game, that is where it's all at for this Ravens team, and that's where they're going to better almost all of these teams. We saw the Chiefs run so many times last week. I don't think that has the same success against the Ravens. It's just interesting, but I think that the Ravens are really set against really the rest of the field. I was laughing with Jacob before we came into the studio about really the 49ers. I feel like worst stylistic matchup, just looking at stylistic, not matchups on players and what positions, is the Lions. I feel like the Lions have kind of that offense that is dynamic in its passing game, but also pretty dynamic in its running game. With all the players that they have on offense, I thought that the Lions might be the biggest stylistic problem for the Ravens, and I think that's their least likely matchup. So I have to think that maybe the Ravens are in a really good spot here.
So you think they're the team to beat right now?
Yes, I do, and I know that maybe some people will say, well, the Chiefs are right back here, and of course we're going to have our time with them as well. But I just don't know that the Chiefs have all hands on board this year as they're going to need, because I think this might be one of the tougher teams that they've had to match up with since they've been there, since the Chiefs have gone on this incredible run. You think about the teams that Mahomes has lost to, and I'm already kind of going into that Chiefs section, even though I wanted to hold off on that just a little bit. But if you think about the teams, if it hasn't had a Tom Brady in there, it really just doesn't happen. You don't lose. But Patrick Mahomes is going up against this Ravens team that just seems to be hitting at all cylinders. And this Ravens team has been a Super Bowl worthy team for the last few years. It's been the injuries. So it's not like the roster and the coaching staff, like they haven't had their ducks in a row. This Ravens team is a real powerhouse. It's coming in there. I have to believe that it's flowing right into their wheelhouse here, and that the Ravens have quite the path into the Super Bowl. We're going to move on, though, into the 49ers. This was an interesting one. The 49ers outlast the Packers, and that's exactly how I felt about that game. We'll talk about the 49ers first for this one. I want to talk about the winners first in most of these. I have to think maybe the 49ers have some injury concerns after that game with Deebo Samuel. But, of course, I wonder how the 49 faithful are holding up right now. Because there's been this thing all year long where there's been such a push for Brock Purdy not to be seen as anything like Jimmy Garoppolo. And I feel like this 49ers organization has really tried to pull the wool over the eyes. It depends on what you think. If you feel that the 49ers honestly think that Brock Purdy is way better than Jimmy Garoppolo, then that's just what you think. I'm not going to persuade you off of that. I know what my eyes tell me. And I've seen Jimmy Garoppolo at all points during the season, even if you want to talk about the success he's had. Well, Jimmy Garoppolo had that same success. And now we're moving to playoffs. And that really, of course, it's only one game. And they did get through it, so it's a win. And they'll have a matchup against the Lions, which is actually possibly the easiest matchup of the weekend for any of these teams whatsoever. I feel like on paper, the Lions might be, the least of the teams remaining. But I do feel like the 49ers should be worried and it's still up to debate whether Brock Purdy is just a really cheap Jimmy Garoppolo, which is fine, right? And the only thing you have to understand as a sports fan is that the 49ers could have realized very, very early this is Jimmy Garoppolo, yet he's much cheaper, and the fans simply are not going to take, we got another Jimmy Garoppolo. And so you got to pitch him as something total and package him as something totally different. I think it's okay that Brock Purdy is Jimmy Garoppolo or somewhere around a Jimmy Garoppolo, style. I think that's perfectly fine. I don't know what the push was MVP for middle of the season. I thought McCaffrey. I feel like Brock Purdy's push to MVP killed Christian McCaffrey's pushed MVP almost a little bit by default. I don't know how I felt about that, because I do feel like McCaffrey is that 1A. That's what you go with whenever you're that coaching staff, Shanahan's, you're going with McCaffrey there. So I just feel like the 49ers have to be just a little bit nervous, as this might be a little bit of that same old. And just to hit a little bit on the Packers too. The Packers might be who I had the least opinions about all season. because I think that the Packers are great. I think they exceeded expectations and shocked a lot of people, but I don't think that it was so shocking that it's like the Texans, where you're just like second best, team of the season, and it hasn't even they've done the second best this season. I don't think you can say that, but I do think that they've had a great season. They've learned a lot about Jordan Love and Jordan Love's temperament and mettle. I think they're faced with a very interesting proposition with Jordan Love, and that's simply, do you sign Jordan Love right now and sign him to a long-term deal and maybe try to get a little bit of a discount here, or do you let the season play out? Because if you're the Packers and you're letting the season play out, if Jordan Love goes back to the divisional round, if he wins that divisional round game, let's say even gets to it, but we'll say wins that divisional round game, you're paying Jordan Love top dollar, and there's no real reason not to, because Jordan Love can then go to the market and get anything you want, theoretically. Not that this will happen, because the Packers will then re-sign him to 35, 36, 37, whatever it is. But I do think that Jordan Love could be bought on a long-term deal now, definitely cheaper than you'd get him. And I think even if you're at 32 million, 28, 29, 32 million in the fourth year, and 4 years from now, 32 million for a quarterback is cheap. That's going to be ridiculously cheap. So I don't know. And maybe it's not possible. Maybe Jordan Love and his agent are just going to say no to that anyway. But I think as a Packers organization, you're going to have to sit down with Jordan Love and get on that contract work early, because I think the number only goes up the more you wait. We've seen that.
Yeah, I think they at least got to try. They got to do what they can. I don't want to say strike while the iron's hot, because it's hot for for Jordan Love right now. But I really think that they got to go sooner, hopefully rather than later, for them, so they can excuse me, so they can hopefully get him at a discount.
I agree with that a lot, actually, and I just would really like to see that kind of early movement on quarterbacks, just to see what that does to the market, because I don't like when we have to hear Lamar get pushed to the final, the 11th hour on a situation that works. That's the craziest part about that Ravens situation, is that it worked on the field. We're talking about money. It's off the field. I understand that. Yet on the field, the relationship was there. The work was there. It was the contract issues that was causing any of the friction at all, and any of the possibility that Lamar Jackson might not be a Raven. And just think about what that could have looked like for the Ravens. Now, would they be here? Certainly not. So it's just interesting. I think the team's got to get on this quarterback train earlier. And of course, I think quarterbacks should be pushing for those longer term deals, but it shouldn't be the teams dictating contract negotiations out that far, especially if you're a Lamar Jackson and 100% worth the money, in my opinion. So moving on to that third game, Sunday, we're getting to the Sunday games. The Lions get past the Buccaneers. It's hard to hate the Lions, especially this season. You can't hate the Lions. When's the last time that they've reached a conference championship? Since 1992. I was born in 1997. And of course we could talk about the losing that game, but to Washington. But I don't think that's really. It's not relevant, and nothing is relevant with this team. Even last year isn't relevant to this Lions team. That's what's so cool about it. This is a totally different team than even last year. Jahmyr Gibbs gives him an explosion at running back that he just didn't have. Like this Lions team is really good, and if this is the year to do it, you're always going to run into that match. You got to get over the Giant at some point if you're David. And the Lions are David, and the Goliath is the 49ers of the season, of the NFL, of the NFC at least, is the 49ers. And, so far the story has gone really well, but this is the one game where the Lions just should not have enough to win this game. And I think people would be okay with seeing a Lions loss here and still think that the Lions had an extremely successful season as well. But, I mean, in that building, it is just, for right now, just get over this one game, because the 49ers were a majority of people's Super Bowl winning favorites, I think. I think if we were to consult the betting books, it would back us up on that. So, yeah, I definitely feel like the Lions, what more can we say? Great for Jared Goff, getting 2 wins, coming out of nowhere. And really he was supposed to go to Detroit and die. That was the running joke. And of course, I like the mentality. I don't think there was a better place for a quarterback to land than another team like that was just like, we have been losing forever. We're on our get back. You're also on your get back, from a certain different thing that wasn't at all similar to ours. But yet it did provide a very similar feeling for the two. And I think that's where the bonding and the growth really happened there for the Lions. I think that's awesome. Now, we get to talk about the Buccaneers. And in just a little bit, we are going to be getting into our coaching carousel. I have a whole lot of names, whole lot of teams, whole lot of ideas about this. And a lot of good stuff here. But this is one of those, I've heard reports that Todd Bowles is likely going to be the coach for next season, but I don't know if that's so much in stone. In fact, I think you have to pay Baker Mayfield, the quarterback. I don't think you're going to have a better quarterback choice coming next year, 2024. I don't think there's a foreseeable quarterback comparable to Baker Mayfield. And I just think that Baker Mayfield has earned it with this year of play. Now, the head coaching position, I feel completely different in. I don't know if Todd Bowles deserves to come back as a head coach. I don't know if that was ever a thing, because if you look at the roster people are going to point out the dead cap and whatever, this is a very talented Buccaneers roster. And I don't know if the roster has ever played to its potential this year. That's just, look at the names on that team. It's incredible. Even you talk about like defensive line, front seven, it's all still there. It just has, I don't think it's been utilized to its fullest degree yet. I feel like the Buccaneers would be silly not to look into this year's coaching staff, this year's coaching pool of staff that's available.
There's so many out there, it seems like, at least right now.
Yeah, and so many perfect names, great names, veteran names, talented, proven names that the Buccaneers cannot sit back this week, because you would just be losing out on just too much. This is not the year to sit back and say, I think my head coach is okay. Because if your head coach is okay, there's better head coaches out there. And that's for 1 year, that's without a doubt. You cannot tell me that you're going to put your head coach, Todd Bowles, up against Pete Carroll, Bill Belichick, Mike Vrabel, all of them, maybe one, all of them. I have a hard time. Thinking, as a fan base, as a Tampa Bay fan base that has recently gone to the Super Bowl, you don't want to see this team fall apart in shambles. I think you've got to reach out and say, go big. And I think this is the year to go big, because then look at the other side. Look at what these coaches are going to have to look at. And I've leaked so many things already into our second segment here, but I don't care. The point is, outside of the Chargers, where's the better quarterback situation for sure, right? If you're the Commanders, you're going to get a top-flight rookie quarterback and get to work with them. There's a few other teams that'll have that. If you like Bryce Young, you go to the Panthers. We're going to talk about the Panthers. Yet, I think other than the Chargers, Baker Mayfield might be the second best quarterback on any of the teams that I have. And third best quarterback on any of the teams that I have looking for a new head coach. I've got to think that's a very attractive situation, at least more than some of these other teams. Because I feel like this year, the coaches available are just maybe above the coaching opportunities available. These coaches should be accepting the Chargers jobs and positions such as, and there's going to be positions like the Panthers jobs and the Commanders jobs that are going to be open and possibly lure one of these guys in. All right, moving on to our final topic here, and this is one that fans will possibly love hearing about the most, of course, because locally, right underneath Mizzou Student Center here, stationed in Columbia, fans all around Columbia, all around Missouri, all around the world pretty much, got to see the Chiefs pull it out against the Bills in spectacular fashion. And all Kansas City Chiefs fans know that was really a well-played game, despite it being so close on the Kansas City Chiefs, because the Kansas City Chiefs dared the Bills to play safe with them, which is ridiculous. That is not what the Bills should have been doing. The Bills should have been going with whatever they went with all year long that's gotten them success. Instead, they try to run the ball a ton and limit, Josh Allen's touches. It's not a good idea. You want the ball in Josh Allen. That's just how you've gotten there. Why are you going to go into a game and switch it up and try to compete the way that the Chiefs are? The Chiefs this year have been running the ball very well. That's been possibly better than even their passing offense to some. I disagree. I think maybe the passing offense has been hated on too much. It's now a little underrated, but that running offense has been special for them. And I don't think it was right for the Bills to game plan to go in there and be like, we're going to run as well, and we're both going to play to limit the turnovers. I think that Josh Allen should have had the ball a lot more. I think Josh Allen was the key to beating the Chiefs this year, and I really didn't like how the Bills played it. If I was assigning grades to each of those teams, it wouldn't be close. I would say that the Chiefs would get like an A minus, and I'm going to say B plus. There were drops and things. There were things on the field, but as far as game plan for the Chiefs, it was incredible. And I got to say the game plan for the Bills was not spectacular at all. And I think it's worthy of possibly putting some hot coals underneath Sean McDermott's feet, certainly. And moving on to the Chiefs, this is one of those weird things because there's been rumors around, and maybe Chiefs fans don't want me to talk about this, but it's been out there, and there's been talk about a possible Andy Reid retirement. I had considered and speculated on an Andy Reid retirement throughout this entire year, not really on the basis of really anything, but there was just a feeling. It was more of a feeling than anything else. And even whenever I was creating these coaching, openings and looking at all the openings, looking at all the hiring possibilities, I caught myself looking down the list of, the Mike Vrabels, Belichick, and all of these coaches that I seem extremely well. And I said, which one would sit out a year and not coach a team for a year and say, that's okay, I'll sit out and pick up something better next year. And I just found that so hard for all of these coaches to do. Bill Belichick, I could not see Bill Belichick sitting out a year. I don't see it in him. Mike Vrabel, couldn't see Mike Vrabel sitting away from football for a year. And the same with Pete Carroll. I just don't see it. But with Andy Reid, I could see it. I could see Andy Reid saying, hey, I've had a ton of success. My friend, Eric Bieniemy, went over to the Commanders, was supposed to find success there, did not find possibly the success he was looking for. Possibly, we're going to talk about the chances of, Bieniemy becoming the head coach of the Commanders. I think it's almost zero. You would have already done it by now. I think that's pretty clear. So if he's not, then that was not a successful venture. But if Andy Reid really feels that way about Bieniemy, then it's certainly time for Bieniemy maybe to step into the Kansas City Chiefs head coaching position and Andy Reid to step out. That is my belief. I do believe that is coming down to that. It's just, you got to think about Andy Reid and all the success he's had. I mean, what more was there? You talk about all the years in Philadelphia, all the years where he could never win the big one. Then he goes out there, he wins it in 2019, and that is out of not even talked about anymore. He's won 2 more since then. What more does he have to achieve? That's just my question there.
More Super Bowl wins. Why would you stop when you're on top? No,
that's why I feel like each one of the other coaches I mentioned, I think that's exactly their take. I don't know if Andy Reid is built that way, especially when it's such a big year, not only for him, but for his counterpart, Eric Bieniemy. It's a perfect timing. It's one of those kind of things. And you see in college coaching, they always want to kind of build from within. Even in the NFL, you saw Gerard Mayo get the elevation there. The Titans, of course, was Brian Callahan, and then upgrading their own guys to offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. That's exactly how I feel that system would go with Kansas City. Kansas City is such a well-run system. It feels like all the well-run systems really like to already start building a coaching. I do feel like Eric Bieniemy is Kansas City Chiefs guy for sure. All right, and with that'll take us to a quick break. Right on the other side of this break, the Blake and Jake show is going to break down the coaching carousel. We got like 8 different teams, possibly even more names. It's going to be exciting, a lot of fun, and very relevant. Coming up super soon, you're listening to KCOU 88.1, the student voice of the Mizzou Tigers. welcome back into the Blake and Jake show, of course, on KCOU 88.1, your home of the Mizzou Tigers. All right, Jake, go ahead and take it away with our second segment.
Yeah, Blake. So, the playoffs are winding down. As we mentioned earlier, there's no longer going to be games on Saturday. The NFL's gearing up for the offseason. So now we've got 8 coaches lined up, and we're going to play the Coaching Carousel Game.
All right, and I'm excited about this. And I'm going to start with a little prelude here. I have 5 teams on this list that are, of course, looking for a head coach right now. 3 teams on this list are not. We've already talked about 1, the Chiefs. We talked about 2, the Buccaneers. The third one we did not talk about before our break was the Bills. And because this might be just a little bit of a heater, I am going to go on a slight rant here. I think that the Bills should be considering a head coaching move. I do. And here's my proof. Here's my proof. You know what? I won't try to persuade you with cool words, interesting language, or anything like that, any gaudy special numbers. I'm going to tell you each one of the coaches that have been employed with the same team since 2017. That is a list that is very small, that includes Sean McDermott on this list. In fact, other than Sean McDermott, we're talking 5 other names. Number 1, John Harbaugh, Super Bowl winner, 2013. Andy Reid, Super Bowl winner, 2019, 2020, 2022. Sean McVay was a rookie head coach in 2017, started the same year. 2021 Super Bowl, also coach of the year. Mike Tomlin, 2008 Super Bowl. The only other head coach on this list that does not have a Super Bowl is Kyle Shanahan. Has been to 2, hasn't won 1. Sean McDermott cannot get to the conference championship with these Bills. He cannot get to the Super Bowl with these Bills. He's had plenty of years to show it. Each one of these great coaches that I just named, and these are all considered the elite coaches that should be hired at the same place for as long as they have made do on their promise of a Super Bowl. Sean McDermott has done the Bills wrong, and I stand by that. I think I have some special coaches in line for that team, but we're going to start by introducing each one of the head coaches that I think is going to get a job, and then talking about some specific places. We're going to go ahead and start with Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson is the offensive coordinator for the Lions and has been really one of the top coordinators getting buzz over the last few years, and was really hard to place. One of the few ones that I've almost found no real ends as to a place that would have a special tie to Ben Johnson over any other place. And there certainly are some coaching relationships, but you never know when a guy works with another guy in the NFL if they want to continue working with that guy. So it's hard for me to just look at, hey, they worked together for 3-4 years. I think he'll go work with this guy again. I see Ben Johnson to the Seahawks. That might shock a few different people there. But obviously wanting a fresh face, having Pete Carroll, they're not going to go for somebody who's the same sort of way with the overbearing, I'm going to take control of everything. You're not going to get a Belichick in there. You could see a Vrabel in there. I tried to talk myself into a Vrabel to the Seahawks move. It's possible. And here's the thing. What you got to understand is any team that brings Vrabel into a head coaching meeting is going to have a hard time walking away from that and not hiring Coach Vrabel. Because if you hear Coach Vrabel speak for just a few minutes, you want to run through walls, jump off bridges, and into deep, cold waters. It doesn't even matter. He's a special guy who can really just gear up a room. And so I have to think that Vrabel could go anywhere just because of that. But I see Ben Johnson here going to the Seahawks because of a fresh, smart face. If you're wanting something new, Ben Johnson is one of those things that's new in your own conference that has been lighting up teams and really, bringing this Lions team to a new height. So I've got to think that Ben Johnson is on the radar for the Seahawks. Now, we talked about this one just a little bit. This next coaching, I have two teams for this guy, and both I feel like are very good possibilities. I have Eric Bieniemy going to either the Chiefs or the Panthers. Now, that's two wildly different teams there. Yeah. You think about the Chiefs, who have been in plenty of Super Bowls. We've already talked about Andy Reid and his Super Bowl collection there. And then the Panthers, who have possibly been one of the worst teams here. And this is because, really, Andy Reid possibly retiring could be an olive branch to Eric Bieniemy that would otherwise probably be forced to take the Panther job. I don't think Eric Bieniemy would wait much longer to become a head coach, regardless of which team was jockeying for his employment. I think that the Panthers are on Eric Bieniemy's list because simply I don't know how many other teams will, with the Commanders not going ahead and picking him up as a head coach. I have to assume that he'll find employment with the Panthers because I can't believe any of these great coaches, Bill Belichick, Vrabel, Pete Carroll, are going to entertain the Panthers' wild owner who is right now firing head coaches at an alarming rate and seems to have his nose right up his head coach's business right there. And I don't think any real valuable and just proven head coach would want that from an owner. A meddling owner is one of the possibly worst and hardest struggles to overcome for a head coach. I can't see any of these head coaches going to the Panthers. I do have the Panthers for one other person on this list here. So the Panthers are not without a head coach if Eric Bieniemy goes to the Chiefs. But first, we're going to talk about another very special coordinator here, Bobby Slowick, offensive coordinator for the Texans. And what a year. And I've already talked about this. The Texans should be doing everything in their power not to let Slowick leave the building. Slowick has been so important to Stroud's success and the Texans' success, especially with having a defensive head coach, that bond cannot be broken this early into that relationship. I think of just how damaging that would be. If you take even like Eric Bieniemy moving on from Patrick Mahomes, it was so clear how the offense just struggled early on. And even though I've said, I think they're underrated in the latter half of the season, that's up for debate. That's really up for debate. If we were to take a snapshot of even what they looked last year, it was much different. It was much different. They didn't have Tyreek Hill either of those 2 years, but it did look much different. And so I've got to think that Bobby Slowick has got to be the Texans' number one priority to keep in the building. But when you've got somebody like that, it's hard to keep them in. It really is. And I have the Seahawks and the Buccaneers for this. And the Seahawks is who I feel the strongest about. I do feel like the Seahawks want a young offensive coordinator for a head coach, somebody they feel like is super special, because I think they're going to invest in a new quarterback pretty soon. I think that's the mindset of the Seahawks ownership. I don't, however, once again, Vrabel's the one here that's possible because he could get into the Seahawks room and talk them up. But I think that the Seahawks are pointed in a direction that says young offensive coordinator over, another Pete Carroll for say,
like a more experienced.
Yeah, they've already ran that train, right? They've had Pete Carroll for some time now. I think they're wanting something new. I think they're wanting a dynamic that's new, and I think that comes with getting a young offensive coordinator. I think that's where we'll see the Seahawks go this year for a head coach. Fourth on my list, though, is Dan Quinn, defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. And this one was a hard one for me because I don't know if Dan Quinn should move on from the Dallas Cowboys for a totally different reason than I do for Bobby Slowick and the Texans. The Texans have something very special, and I think both the Cowboys and Dan Quinn haven't quite proven themselves to move on to the next level almost, Like, you never want to skip ahead if you're playing a video game or, putting together a puzzle or anything. You're never going to push ahead, and I don't think you do that here. I think that if you're Dan Quinn, you stay with the Dallas Cowboys and you stay their defensive coordinator until you can once again come off at a high point, because this year just wasn't. Last year, I think you could really talk a lot of teams into looking at Dan Quinn as an actual potential head coach. This year, I think that talk's much harder.
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially with how the way the season ended for the Cowboys. It's just I agree.
And their defense was never spectacular either. They were definitely taken advantage of. Parsons was spectacular. Outside of that, it wasn't great. Now they lost their cornerback, Diggs. So that's something, but it's not everything. Yeah. It is not everything. And so I do have one team here for Dan Quinn, and we're taking a very similar approach here to the Panthers, and we're going Panthers for Dan Quinn because I simply think that if Dan Quinn wants a head coaching job, he's going to have to be a little desperate. Is that the Commanders? Possibly. But I think it really could be the Panthers. I think the Panthers are eventually going to at least throw money at a coach that is going to get them as I can't turn that down. And once again, I don't think it's the top line. I don't think it's the elite head coaches here on the offer sheet. I think it's the ones that are fighting for a position. And I think Dan Quinn, if you're looking for somebody that is a veteran but still a coordinator, which is a strange look, but it still is one that we've seen be interesting to different owners around the league. I think you could see Dan Quinn to the Panthers. Now's one of my ultimate favorite ones. I find this so exciting, and I have been kind of wanting this just out of anarchy. Bill Belichick. Let's talk about where Bill Belichick is going to be coaching a football team next year. Spectacular. I've got to say, first, this is where the Bills come onto the board. I've talked about where the Bills can go to get better. Why not look at the guy who has been tearing you apart for years and decades to get to Super Bowl after Super Bowl, when now you're really in the perfect spot when you feel like, he's down and out, he doesn't have his quarterback, and you're struggling to get there, and you do have your quarterback. Bills ownership cannot sit there and not be interested in Belichick. It would be a crime. It would be a crime not to sit down Belichick in Bills country and say, can you get us to a Super Bowl? What is it going to take? And at least talk it out. Now,
you got to at least try, right?
Yes, and there's been some talk. See, it's already not worked. In fact, the Falcons were supposedly hot on the Belichick trail, 2 meetings, and that seems to have died down. But I don't know how you could be the Bills and not accept that. How could you not accept the winningest, going to be, especially if you put him on the Bills, the winningest head coach ever? You've got to accept a head coaching position from that. You have to at least an interview. And I think Belichick on the Bills fits a defensive culture, so they wouldn't mind if the interest is in defense. Yet you still have Josh Allen, so you've got to say, if Bill is willing to work with Josh Allen, willing to get somebody to work with Josh Allen, willing to have Josh Allen be his long-term quarterback, that's got to be an attractive head coaching interest for the Bills. I've got to think that's got to be number one. Number two I have on this list is wild, wacky, weird, but why not, right? Everything about this year's coaching pool and coaching carousel in general is wacky and weird. Why not go ahead and take Belichick to the Buccaneers? Why not? Follow in Tom Brady's footsteps. Both of them have worked so closely together. We could possibly talk about, is it a natural phenomenon to go from, cold and gross up there in Foxborough down to Tampa Bay, sunny for retirement? It's a topic. Why not? Bill Belichick to the Buccaneers makes a lot of sense on paper and off paper. Really, if you want to look up and down that roster and say Belichick could get a lot from this. And there's a lot of special there, and I don't think that the Tampa Bay Bucs ownership would be a problem with relinquishing some roles over to Belichick. I think this would be one of the ownership groups that would be more inclined to listen to Belichick and fit his needs. I don't know how you feel about that, Jake.
Well, I want to know why do you think that? Why do you think that they would be most likely to kind of go?
Yeah, I mean, the great question, but also it's just kind of been the Tampa Bay Buccaneers since forever. I mean, you have a little bit of a coaching issue, and you're like, oh, we'll just then push you up into our front office.
Okay. And
Todd Bowles, you're now our new coach, and it's like, oh, why? It didn't make any sense. That doesn't compute. Why would you just why that move? And Belichick, it makes a lot of sense. Well, if it's an ownership that's willing to be more flexible in how they run ownership than and how they run, front office and everything like that, why not work with Belichick, the winningest winningest head coach of all time?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And he did, indirectly give them the winningest quarterback of all time.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
that is a point there to be made that, I think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers owe Belichick just a little bit.
They owe something at least.
I certainly agree. My very last pitch for that. No, I'm not even going to make that pitch. Moving on to Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel is the most interesting character on this list because he can go to almost anywhere. And part of it's because what I said. If you put Mike Vrabel in a room and let him talk, you might just be giving him a head coaching position at the end of that meeting. So I've got the Seahawks and the Falcons. I like this position for him the best. I think the Seahawks fit Mike Vrabel well, and they have some great defensive pieces. They're usually built in a defensive culture anyway. They and defensive guys respond to Mike Vrabel, and Mike Vrabel has all the respect, will have all of the admiration, and all of everything he'll need to be a head coach there at the Seahawks. He would be just worshipped by those players. It really comes into that ownership group, which I'll be honest, as a newer ownership group, I have no idea what they're looking for, but you do know what Mike Vrabel is, and you do know if he gets into a room, he's very, very persuasive. The second team I have on this list, and I think this is 50-50 here, and I think this is possibly the best situation for Mike Vrabel, might even be the best situations of all the coaches looking for spots minus the Chargers, and it is the Falcons. I love the Falcons. And I love Mike Vrabel being on the same team. I think that's a very interesting matchup there. I find that Bill Belichick went and took 2 meetings and didn't get hired. So you have to think what Bill Belichick does and is about is interesting to the Falcons, whether or not Belichick was. And so if you're Arthur Blank, owner of the Atlanta Falcons, you've got to bring in Belichick, or you got to bring in Belichick's guy and talk to Vrabel and see if Vrabel is open to coaching the Falcons, because the Falcons are possibly the second most interesting team, possibly best team to really pick up with their, everything that they have set up. It's not, to be honest, it's not pretty. The Chiefs and the Bills are the 2 best spots, but those head coaching spots aren't open. You've got the Chargers. The Chargers are a great spot. And then it gets interesting. If the Buccaneers aren't open, it is the Seahawks or Falcons that are the second best job spot. So you've got to think that's got to be on Mike Vrabel's list. And finally, our very, very last head coach here, not very last, second to last head coach. I'm so sorry about that. Pete Carroll. We've talked about Pete Carroll a lot today. It feels like we've probably already done Pete Carroll, but we haven't. Pete Carroll, number 1 on my list, I have the Buccaneers. And if you were to ask me to put most persuasive in a room, I think Pete Carroll would be my number 2 to Mike Vrabel's 1. Taking out our final one, because our final one's almost a lock here. I'm going to keep that one as a lock. We're removing this situation from all others. But I think that Pete Carroll really fits the Buccaneers. I think that they have a lot of talent. I feel like a lot of their players care about the motivation side of things. Like, the motivation factor is important to them, that they have a head coach that is motivating and can connect with these players in a hoorah sort of fashion, and Pete Carroll can certainly do that.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. Is it's just everything I've seen about Pete Carroll is that he's a very, very motivating person. And he'll be willing to run up and down the field, and he'll do what it takes to motivate his guys. And
I do question the Buccaneers' motivations at all points during the season, and it's a very winnable. Here's the thing too: it's a very winnable division. You don't need the best X's and O's head coach. You need a proven head coach, and that's enough to win that division. So I've got to think that the Buccaneers are looking at somebody proven, and if it's not Belichick, you really can't go wrong with a Pete Carroll there. I do have some few others for Pete Carroll. I have the Commanders and the Chiefs. Now the Chiefs is kind of just like a maybe, like what if, that'd be interesting. The Chiefs have a rap sheet of going after these respected coaches. That's how they got Andy Reid. So it's possible they say, let's do it again. Let's go get another proven great head coach that, would be easy to work with in the long term. I don't think they would go Belichick. That is one team I don't think they need Belichick. I don't think they might be interested in Vrabel, but I don't think the match is perfect. I do find Pete Carroll as kind of a decent. It's different. You're not going to find another Andy Reid. If it's not Eric Bieniemy, why not Pete Carroll is my question. And then, of course, the Commanders. And the Commanders are interesting. I picked the Commanders because they have the second pick in the draft. And Pete Carroll's been notoriously good at a draft and seems to have a great connection with college. So I've got to think if Pete Carroll feels like he really wants a quarterback out of that draft, and maybe it's not Caleb Williams, who will likely go number 1 to the Bears as of right now, I've got to think that maybe that's an interesting spot for Pete Carroll there, to think that maybe he sees a quarterback he likes, he can coach that quarterback, and then focus on the rest of the team as well. That's not a terrible team. It's a build. Now, the culture issues from the past and changing all that around, of course, can be a negative going into that. But I think if you want a culture changer, you get Pete Carroll, and that is probably what the Commanders need more than anybody, especially right now, to make sure that culture is in tune. All right. And that, of course, moves us to our very final here. We have Jim Harbaugh, Los Angeles Chargers. I think that deal's almost done. Doesn't compete in the same division as brother. That division looks great. A great quarterback in place. He gets to go back into the warmth. He was at the 49ers for a long time, so he's enjoying the warmth. Goes to Michigan. It's freezing bone cold up there. I think even local fans will know it's super cold here right now. Don't want to be in Michigan. And then, of course, gets to head back out to Los Angeles and go to the Chargers. I think that's just a great place. That wraps up today's show. And that was the second episode of the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1. It's an exciting start of the year and a good launch point to where we want this show to be. If you enjoyed listening, I invite you to be one of our very first followers on our newly created Instagram, the Blake and Jake Show. That's the Blake and Jake Show, no spaces. If you caught part of the show, but not the whole show, want to hear the show over again, all of that's perfectly fine by us. You're going to look up on YouTube or Spotify, the Blake and Jake Show, and you will have not just the full length, but in time there will be segments of each portion that we do as well. So go ahead and check us out there. Of course, like and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening to the Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM.